The Inspector General of Police, that's Kayode Egbetoko, told organizers of the protest to make available details of their schedule to enable the police to adequately provide protection for them. He made this known to newsmen at the force headquarters while briefing them on the measures taken by the police to ensure that lives and property are protected.
Others advocate for peaceful demonstrations. However, some individuals promote peaceful protest with violent undertones, raising concerns about their sincerity. We have our own history of violent protests in Nigeria, and I don't believe we have to look to other countries to know the dangers of unchecked demonstrations. We commend patriots who have withdrawn from the protest due to their apparent sinister motives and ignorance of those calling for violence. We note those who have spoken out against any form of protest at this critical juncture, fearing enemies of our country may be manipulating the process.
Meanwhile, organizers of the planned nationwide protest have started writing the Commissioner of Police and stakeholders in different states across the country, and they are seeking for venue and police protection. One of such group, Take It Back Movement FCT, wrote to the Minister of the FCT, Nyesom Wike, requesting venue for the protest. Another group, Active Citizens Group, wrote to the Commissioner of Police in Lagos, notifying the command of a planned peaceful protest and requesting security support. The Lagos Police Command has acknowledged receiving a letter for protest in the state. As the groups continue to prepare ahead of the planned protest, other associations are announcing that their members have no intention to join the protest. Now, the organizers of the planned protest say the reason for the agitation is to demand economic and political reforms from the federal government. Now, on the program today, we will talk to analysts to dissect the performance of the Tinubu administration, and is the call for #EndBadGovernance really necessary? That's our conversation today. We'll be speaking with security and defense consultant and CEO Aquilin Intelligence, Oyekachi Adekoya. He joins us in the studio. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
We also have a development policy scholar, Dr. Jelili Adebi. He also joins us in the studio. Good to have you join us.
Thank you for the opportunity to engage the conversation.
All right, so joining us via Zoom, we have a lecturer at the Department of Economics at the Michael Okpara University of Agriculture, Modike, Dr. Chukuma Agbona. He joins us via Zoom, like I said earlier, from Abia State. Good to have you join us.
Thank you, Precious.
All right, so
glad to see the program.
All right, so thank you all for joining us. But now let's get into the conversation, because there are about three different aspects of this conversation that I want us to talk about. One is the side of the protesters, what they're agitating for, the response of the government and what he said it has done so far, and then where I think that, of course, not where I think, where you are an expert is how the security agencies are also responding, especially the police are also responding to this. So let's look at all of this. Let's begin with the protesters. What do you make of the call, for this protest, and what the protesters are saying? Look, things are difficult, and we need to hit the streets. Perhaps maybe the government will listen to us this time.
Okay. I think that if you listen to the president himself, right from when he campaigned that this would be a difficult job. Even during the campaign season, it was clear that whoever won the election had a very tough call to make on certain issues on national development. So there are issues really in terms of economic hardship. But we say in management speak that at every point of change or at every curve, there's always a crisis. So macroeconomic speaking, there's some instability. The headwinds are there. The immediate effects of the policy reforms that the government is trying to embark upon, again, is a bitter pill that Nigerians must undertake. Some people also do not recognize that this government is saving about 1 trillion naira now every month, as opposed to printing by ways and means almost 29 trillion under the past administration. So we are turning a corner, but there's hardship and the pains are there. So if you ask what I make of the protest, I think it's just a normal reaction by the populace really to some of the throes of the reforms being undertaken. On the side of law, people have a fundamental right. There's a right to protest, peaceful protest. And I don't think that any of the agencies, the DSS, the military, the police, have said that people have a right to peaceful protest and assembly. However, if you look at the language used by the DSS, they had also warned that some elements have their own objective. And it's typical that when you have a movement, some other people have their own objectives, jump on that particular movement in pursuit of their own objectives. So I'm neither here nor there on the protest, really. I just ask that the protest, if it does occur, should be peaceful. It should also mind the rights of other people, because the right of movement is also fundamental. You cannot abrogate my own right to free movement just because you are also exercising your own right to protest. So, I've seen some requests for use of public space by the would-be protesters. I think that is good. If they can do their protests within those public space and limit it to those areas, being mindful of the rights of other Nigerians who may be also going about pursuing their own value, because a good number of Nigerians are itinerant workers. People earn money on a daily basis. If you knock people out of daily living for 14 days, unintendedly, we can create a bigger crisis than what the protesters may be wanting to protest about. So that's my assessment of it. I hold no personal opinions, really.
All right. So I want to, pick up on some of the things he said. One of them is that we are saving about 1.something million now. Trillion rather now, and he's also talking about we're turning a corner. For some Nigerians who are listening, they are wondering, we're saving money, but it doesn't feel like we're saving money because it's not reflecting on my own lifestyle. What does that mean for me if government is saving money? And so I wanted to also speak to that as a development policy scholar, why there is that gap.
Well, thank you so much for that stimulating question. When we talk about development, it's not just about revenue. Development encompasses a number of indicators. Part of that indicators is the well-being of the people. And it's about the most important thing when it comes to governance, especially within a democratic setting. And the purpose of policy is not to impose hardship on the people. It's to lessen the burden of hardship, development challenges that the people are experiencing. No reasonable person standing an election is going to campaign on the pedestal of policies that will exacerbate hardship. We've had in our cases that we fought to elect a government. I was among those that vociferously campaigned aggressively to have Asiwaju emerge as the president of the country. The truth is this: our policies have exacerbated the living condition of the people. The street tells the story. I've been speaking with people, family members. The cost of running generators, providing electricity by an average Nigerian. A friend of mine was the director of Baobab Plus. When I visited him, from 20,000 naira powering his house in a month, it increased during the presidency of our principal to 220,000 naira a month. Take note of that. Just for one issue. Other issue, feeding the family. The bill, eating, and even below the regular standard of the family increased by more than 1,000%. Think about that. Schools are increasing fees. Parents have had to struggle keeping up with the bills of financing the education of their children, especially at the tertiary level. So the policies that we've implemented as a government has made the street to hit a point of frustration. And the essence of policies in development arena is not to exist at the expense of the people, at the expense of the well-being of the people. Whenever we implement a policy and there are triggers exacerbating the wellness condition, worsening the living condition of the people, what we do in policy is not to continue with our policy, because policies are not cast in the stone. Policies are meant to evolve and respond to the reality of the street, to the needs of the people, to the well-being of the people. Our government has not been able to do that. So we have a mandate to tell our principal that we work for, that there is a need for us to go back and rethink those policies.
I want to get to Dr. Ogbonna in just a minute, but let me ask you, which of those policies do you think that, because you've talked about reversing policy if it's exacerbating the sufferings of the people, which of those policies do you think are not working at this moment, perhaps should be reversed?
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's another stimulating question. When we talk about revisiting the policy, it will not be a case of outright invalidation of those policy or reversal of those policy. Sometimes we may need to interrogate the underlying assumptions behind the policy. I'll give you a very good example. One of the underlying assumptions behind the removal of fuel subsidy was that it was a scam, not benefiting the masses. Some people were just collecting this money. Our good friend, Emir Sanusi, Lamido Sanusi, spoke, eloquently about this issue. But one question was not asked. Which data was Sanusi citing? What was missing in this data? But when we removed fuel subsidy, it became apparent that there was not just a scam, that the fuel subsidy was keeping the standard, the cost of living cheaper in Nigeria. It was keeping it below a threshold that could serve the needs of everybody. That was when they discovered that the fuel subsidy was indeed benefiting the masses in some ways. It's one of the issues we need to revisit. The World Bank, the IMF, doesn't have to dictate for us. Who are the folks in the World Bank? Some of my students that we taught in the university. Some of the folks that we were educated with. We need to listen to issues. We need to talk to professors of economy at the University of Obafemi Awolowo University, locally, who understand our local issues. Otherwise, we'll continue in this.
Okay, I see that, Mr. Dekora, your body language is almost like look, I have to say something, I have to say something. I want to be sure that we can bring in Dr. Ogbonna now, as we get, because he's an economist. I'll come to you. I know you want to respond.
Actually, Dr. Ogbonna apparently is my classmate in school.
Oh, really?
Amazing.
Okay.
We studied together.
Perhaps we'll have, oh, really?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm sure both of you have your reunion after. All right, so Dr. Ogbonna, let me bring you in, because Dr. Jalili has also talked about the idea of reversing policies. But, we've heard some of the people in this government, and some who are not even in government, saying there is no problem with the policy. It's just that it's going to take time to see the positives that comes with the policy. What's your opinion? Are these policies problematic, or just a look, it will take time to deliver the dividends?
Okay, thank you very much. Let me dwell on that fuel subsidy removal. That policy is a very good policy, because the president has been able to save over a trillion since the commencement of that policy. The only challenge I think we're having is the communication gap. The president knows where he's going to, but he needs to carry people along. Let me paint a classroom scenario, but that's where I'm coming from. Assuming let's say a hypothetical example, a family of 4. They don't have a color television, and the children also want Christmas clothes. It's left for the father to bring the children together, tell them, we don't have enough money to get what we want, but if we can save up, by the end of the year, we'll either get a color television or the Christmas clothes. So when these children go out to see other children who are eating 3 square meals, they won't be disturbed, because they know they have a goal that by the end of the year, they will continue. So that communication gap of telling people, and again, economists will teach us that people should have choices. So the only thing I think the government should look at is providing alternative. the Port Harcourt refinery should come upstream and probably other government refineries. With that, that impact in our pockets will be that much. Thank you.
All right. So let's turn to the economist turned security expert. You were listening. I knew you had your body language to him earlier.
Yes.
Let's get your response to what he said.
Yes, I think the problem we may have is that we have too many cooks when it comes to policy issues in Nigeria. It's like the case they say also in economics that it was said that proverbially they ask blind people to describe an elephant. Each person described based on the part that he has touched. Each person correct based on the sensation his senses were telling him at the time. There are the issues clearly of IMF and World Bank. I'll be careful not to share too much of my opinion, but I do agree that there's nothing as a free market economy in the purest sense of it. Every economy must be managed. When the government said they free-floated the naira, floating into the dollar is a fiat currency that is tied to nothing. You had the Bretton Woods agreement that tied the dollar to 35 ounces of gold following the Second World War, upon which international trade was predicated upon. President Nixon vacated the dollar standing to gold in about 1975, 1976, automatically making the dollar nothing. The dollar is worth nothing. In its purest form, it's tied to nothing. So that introduced a system of fiat currency on steroids. And if you look at global economy, every currency is managed. So to the point Doctor was making, that you don't necessarily and overtly free float your currency. You must manage the currency outlook and outcome. And there's no economist I know that would tell you that at $1 to 1,600, that our currency is finding true value. Ukraine is currently at war. Fitch just rated their currency, I think, about junk now. But the Ukraine currency is trading at about $1 to about 100 and something. Nigeria is not at war. We are still a net exporter. If you say we export mono, compare the total dollar value of the oil that we export to the total dollar value of the commodities that other countries export. You may see that we're exporting services, we're exporting raw material, we're exporting dollar, we're exporting crude. We're an exporter, but we also import. Our balance of, our current account is looking good. Balance of trade payment is beginning to improve. There are a number of structural, non-institutional issues that impair policy in Nigeria. So this is my economic side speaking now. But it's also good because we talk about securematics, the mathematics of security, and you look at economics, how security interplays with the economy. Without security, you cannot have economic prosperity. And more so when you come into advice.
And the other way around as well.
Absolutely. Where economics can have security also, because security is expensive. The good thing about the place I stand from and I sit from is that I run an advisory company. I'm able to make a dimension of, we do 4 dimensions: the political economy, you look at the macroeconomy itself, you then look at geopolitics beyond the borders of the particular place you're looking at. Then you now look at the security framing. So we look from that outside lens in to the issues within the economy. And what I'll say is that there has been a clear case of gross mismanagement. We just talked about 29 trillion naira ways and means. Doctors said that subsidy was benefiting people. I have an interest in importation also of certain things. But let me stick to why I'm here. The subsidy thing was clearly a scam. Those selling, and I wish to be quoted, those selling diesel today in Nigeria at 1,200, 1,150 have no business selling diesel at that amount. Diesel should be trading for about 800, 850 naira per liter, even when you consider all the logistics cost of an importation. So if you leave the conditions, to the point Doctor is making, to the market, the capitalist will want to maximize his return. And it is not true, I think it was Adman Sid that said that the capitalist, in pursuit of his own self-informed interests, would eventually work for the interest of society. It's not true these days because the paradigms are shifting, the conditions are shifting. So there are a number of issues. It's not just this administration.
But shouldn't government have a hold on some of these issues, really? Because, you've highlighted, these issues. You know how people, in local parlance would say, after God is government.
Absolutely.
That you can't be greater than government. And so if these issues exist where people, for their own self-interest, are taking advantage of the populace, one would expect that, look, government steps in, have regulation that ensures that people, are not taken advantage of.
So thank you so much. And it comes back to the issue of the elephant in the room. The government itself, in most cases, I'm not talking about specifically the government of President Ahmed Bola Ahmed Tinubu in Nigeria is taking advantage of the people. And there are many factors to this. Look at the history of the people that have served this country in various capacities since the time of democracy. They always leave office where they are than they came into offices. And you keep asking yourself, where does the money come from? And what happens to the situation, the living condition of the people? It has always been the opposite. So when we talk about scam, our leaders are part of the issues. And that is why when we take a stock of the public and private primary and secondary school in the whole of the country, it does not align with the fact that we are in a democracy. Parents have resorted to taking their kids to private elementary school, to private public schools. Why? Because public elementary schools and what have you, they are somehow not assisting. If you want a future for your children, you dare not take your children there. It's just like a death trap. Why? The government is not doing its job. Governors, after they leave offices, what happens? Senators, after they leave offices, the FCC is running after them. So one of the biggest scams that we need to address in our democracy is the orientation with which leaders come into offices with. The purpose of democracy, the purpose of governance is to serve the people.
I like that you said government because it's not just democracy.
So when we get into that,
it's meant to provide public goods.
Exactly. And that is why anytime a policy is exacerbating the living condition of the people, the right thing to do is not to defend that policy. I will now go back to what he was talking about. People look at different sides of an elephant. I trained as a system dynamicist. In system thinking, we look at issues from what we call a comprehensive, broad perspective. When you enact a particular policy, there's what we call emergence characteristics of the system. That emergence characteristics of the system recognizes that it creates a feedback effect. The feedback effect will come back to affect the entire system. My rendering of what is happening based on a system analysis suggests that the intervention that was done by removing the subsidy created a massive disruption. And that was why when you look at the magnification of the suffering in the country, since the time of the removal of the subsidy, and that is why the government is not saying there is no suffering. They have never said suffering has exacerbated since we elected our own principle. Suffering has exacerbated. And what that means is that we introduced the reform at the wrong time. We introduced the reform in a wrong way. And possibly we introduced the wrong reforms. That is what the system thinking will tell you. Now, it now begs the conversation. What could we have done differently? From a system perspective, what we need to look for is a leverage point through which we can achieve the same objective. And there are many ways as to doing this. And the other thing was that, what was the data point? Did you see the data point? Did you see the data point? They were only telling us about the data. That is also a scam. Before you can actually make a policy of that magnitude, there must be transparency about the data, necessitating the fact that we need to take that policy route.
All right.
So there was not enough data to tell us that if we remove the subsidy, what is going to be the consequences on the cost of living. People were just talking about the scam. As a scholar, I know the moment your policy you are making is as good as the data point. that forms the basis of that policy. I challenge Salisu Lamido Sanusi to
let's
show us
bring
the
in-
analysis that they ran that shows that when they removed the subsidy, it was not going to have negative impact on the well-being of the people. I challenge the government to a debate on this.
All right, let me bring in Dr. Ogbonna back into the conversation. Dr. Ogbonna, I want you to respond to Dr. Adebiyi as well when he talked about, he talked about how the policy or how the reform was done, the time the reform was done, and the reform itself. So I wanted to speak to that, and then, before I get to the question I actually wanted to ask you.
Okay. The president took a very bold step in announcing that particular policy, because he didn't want to fall into a trap where he will be looking for money to run the economy. Like I said, the challenge is communication gap. He just needs to tell Nigerians, this is where I'm going to. These are as in the timelines, and as well tell us at every bus stop, this is what or this is what you should expect from the government. So that's just to me that the people who are trying agitate, not the impact. There's the need to understand what is happening in the government. Once the government carries them along, I don't think people will not protest.
Well, does communication cure hunger? Because the issue right now is that people say, look, things are expensive. We cannot afford to feed ourselves and take care of our basic needs as we used to. One wonders if communication can cure hunger, because I remember Dr. Adebiyi also talking about how, the reform was done and, some of the things that should be put in place while the reform is ongoing. I also want you to speak to that.
Okay, now, the thing is, Nigerians were supposed to have been given choices. That policy should have taken effect. We should have had our refineries should have been working. So, since we are not importing again, we now have self-sufficiency. So, if that was in place, what we are spending in it wouldn't be as high as it.
All right.
I have a quick point here.
Sorry, we didn't get the last thing Dr. Ogbonna said because your network was breaking. I just wanted to go back to what you said and then repeat some parts of it.
The policy should have come up with choices. Choices being fixing our refineries, more than one refinery, then removing the subsidy. So, if the policy, if the subsidy has gone, we will not be spending as much as we are spending because we are still importing. So if we are producing it locally, Nigerians wouldn't be complaining the way they are complaining, because what you have in your pocket can still afford what you want.
All right, so I know you want to